I'm Michael Shaw with Xavier Magazine. Today we've invited Graydon Sikes from Cowan's Auctions in Cincinnati to appraise our archive dive of fascinating artifacts that we've located throughout the university. Hello, Graydon.
How you doing, Michael? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for making a house call.
Absolutely. I'm happy to look at a couple of things today.
Well, we'll start out with a real thing, being a seismograph.
Okay, tell me about the background of this piece. When did it make its way to Xavier?
As far as we can tell, or I can tell, in the early 20s, it was part of a seismological station in the bowels of Schmidt Hall.
Xavier University, most beautiful Jesuit university in the country. For over 400 years, the Jesuits have been famed for their outstanding teaching methods. One of the most interesting things about Xavier University is its seismological observatory, which records earthquakes from all over the world. In the observatory, Father Victor Steckschulte has probably done more research on deep focus earthquakes than any scientist in the United States. This seismograph is the delicate instrument that records the quakes.
It was part of a series of seismological stations throughout the world run by Jesuits.
Okay. Well, I can tell you what I know about scientific instruments and their market today, so to speak, because most of these objects are relatively obsolete today and aren't being used anymore. They're considered to be more of a curiosity. And the collecting market for a seismograph such as this probably is very narrow because there are few people that are interested in such things today. Most of them probably collect very specific kinds of scientific instruments. So when I come across these on a routine basis, this kind of early instrument, it's very difficult to find somebody interested in buying them. So the market for it is not substantial. It would probably fall in the low hundreds of dollars today.
So you're saying its value is not earth-shaking?
It is not earth-shaking. Exactly. Today it would probably be worth somewhere in the range of $200 to $400.
We would be willing to throw in, one time only, an actual seismographic reading from the largest earthquake recorded in North America. Not by this machine, but actually from a seismograph located in Milford.
And when did that earthquake occur?
1964.
Okay.
In Alaska.
Okay. Well, that's a really neat piece, at least as evidence of what this kind of machine would do. So it's neat to have them together. They're a great find, I think.
I'm the archives librarian here at Xavier University.
Well, Tim, you have brought a couple of interesting letters here. Why don't you tell me about them? One of them is dated October 25th, 1956, and it is from JFK as a senator. And the other letter is actually signed by Jacqueline Kennedy, and it's dated 1964, March 25th. What are they addressing here?
Well, in 1956, John F. Kennedy was nominated to receive the St. Francis Xavier Medal. It was a medal that's annually given by the Xavier alumni at its Universal Communion Sunday observance. And Father O'Connor, who was the president of Xavier University at that time, made the invitation. This is a response to his letter in which JFK basically says that he appreciates the fact that he was nominated, but he can't accept the award because he's going to be out of the country.
Sure. Okay. And now this one, jumping to this one from 1964, tell us about this one.
It's also related to the St. Francis Xavier Medal. Jacqueline Kennedy accepted for JFK the award posthumously. Again, Xavier offered it again to John F. Kennedy after his death, and it was accepted, and this is a thank you letter from Jacqueline Kennedy.
Okay, well, it's interesting that they offered it to him in 1956, and he wasn't able to accept it. And then they offered it to him again in 1963. So I'm assuming that the award went to somebody else in 1956. Is that right?
Yes.
It's not retroactive. Okay.
No.
Well, the first letter here is simply signed by John F. Kennedy, and that's very typical of a senator. Most of those letters would have been typed by secretarial position, and oftentimes, in addition, some of those letters would have had a stamped signature. This is actually signed in hand by Kennedy, and it would have been typical. He would have signed something of importance. And then the second letter is also typed, probably typed, by a secretarial position, but directed by Jacqueline Kennedy, and then it's signed in hand by her. Senatorial letters such as this by Kennedy, when they do come up and when they sell, and that happens fairly frequently because he signed a lot of things. There is a lot of interest. Kennedy, of course, being a president that is more collectible than most. You put him up there in the range of Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, etc. Obviously, his presidency was short-lived, and there are fewer things out there with his signature. A letter like this would be desirable enough to fetch around $1,000 to $1,500 today if it were to surface on the market and sell. The Jacqueline Kennedy letter would not be quite as valuable, although Jackie O was again someone that was very well known and is very collectible. This letter and her signature would probably fetch somewhere in the $400 to $600 range. But having the two together is really sort of a neat thing that they followed up and eventually awarded the medal posthumously to JFK. So having the two together would even increase its value a bit more. I would think the letters, in their own right, as a pair, would be worth in the $2,000 to $3,000 range. It's a really neat piece of history and a nice pair of letters. So thanks for bringing them up for me to look at today.
Thank you.
Okay, well, hi, Kathann. Thank you for coming in today. You've brought us something with a lot of Xavier history, I understand.
Yes, it is. This is Father Francis J. Finn's personal violin.
Okay.
Father Finn was a trustee here at the university. He also taught classics and literature.
Okay.
He was a writer of young men's books.
Okay.
And he, in one newspaper article, was called the discoverer of Catholic American young men.
Really?
Yes.
So he was a bit of a Renaissance man then.
He was.
Okay.
He also started the Little Flower Circulating Library here in town for children's books. He also was he began a community chest, and he was the one who won the contest to name the athletic teams at Xavier, the Musketeers, and gave them the motto, all for one and one for all.
Really? Okay, so when was he here?
In the 1920s,
Okay, and when did Father Finn pass away?
1928.
Okay, and I take it he left a gift to Xavier or just left this with Xavier after
Actually,
he passed on?
it went to a family friend,
Okay.
and that was passed down to his children and then to his children, and it appeared on our doorstep in the early 2000s.
Okay, gotcha. Well, what we have here is a Cincinnati-made violin. Cincinnati having several companies that produce musical instruments, not only violins, but organs, pianos. Cincinnati has a rich heritage of producing instruments like this. This one was made by Wurlitzer Company, who produced violins. I believe they produced organs as well. And you can see it on the inside of the violin. If you look in the F here, you can see the label. And this one actually is handwritten, R. Wurlitzer, Cincinnati, USA. And it is a copy of a Stradivarius. Often, Stradivarius was the most copied violin in the world for a variety of reasons. And because it was such a desirable instrument, played so well, many companies would copy that form. And so that's what you have here. It was probably made in the early 20th century. It's in its original case and probably has its original bow here. But it's a really nicely put together violin, but it is very common to find these on the market today. So a violin like this, made by Wurlitzer with the Cincinnati heritage, has a much more value to Xavier because of Father Finn than it would on the market. On the market today, it would be worth a few $100s, but no more than that. It would be something that somebody may buy because they'd be interested in playing. But it's a neat little bit of Xavier history. So thank you for bringing it by.
You're welcome.
Nice violin.
Hi, I'm Marty Farrell, and I'm head of collection development at Xavier Library. And part of my responsibilities is special collections. So I've brought this and a few other books for you to take a look at.
Well, you brought an absolute gem today, Marty, because you brought a Nuremberg Chronicle, which many people are familiar with as being one of the early major undertakings in printed publication. And it's amazing that Xavier has one of these because there are only a couple hundred, of this version that are known to exist or that are still there. I think that there were over 1,000 initially printed, but many of those over time, over 500 years and change, they get broken up. Different pages come out. They fall into states of disrepair. And this one, although we did not count all of the pages here, it looks to be pretty complete. So it looks like, let me ask you, from the binding appears to be newer, the cover boards,
Right.
or later.
Right.
Not exactly new, but later. And when did Xavier absorb this book? Do you know? Tell me about what you know about its background.
I do not know.
Okay.
I've been spending a lot of time trying to figure out why we have what we do have. Special collections, some of it is not very well documented, so
Okay.
I know that we've had this for quite a long time. I don't know where it came from, or somebody donated it. It may have been, I've been looking at summaries of some printed articles about the old library, things that were printed in 1876. It's not mentioned there, so I really do not know.
Well, it's a mystery, but it's an interesting mystery and probably merits a little further research where it came from. But essentially, the Nuremberg book was printed in 1493. It's sort of a document of everything they knew, their understanding of the world at that time. And this one, unlike what I have actually seen before, which is not a color version, this appears to be sort of a nicer version, and it would have been more expensive at the time. But there's hand painting here on the frontispiece, or the beginning of the book, and that's beautiful gilt paint and probably gouache or tempera color here on the front page. And then throughout, there are some highlights with watercolor in red, and especially throughout the text. The entire book is printed on laid paper, and if you were to have it under light, this is the type of paper that would have been used at that time. And it's in relatively good condition, considering. These little spots here are foxing. Typically, a book of this age would be pretty heavily toned. The paper would have browned considerably. But this appears to have been kept in pretty good condition and maybe has had some conservation over time. And it's a pretty substantial book. I'm just going to turn a few pages here.
There's notes in the
There are some notes from some of you. See them throughout, and they look like they are possibly the same hand. This publication was riddled with woodcuts, which was an earlier printing process, and all of those would have been separate blocks that would have been used. It was a massive undertaking because all of this had to be published together. So as a 15th century publication, it's really regarded as the holy grail of collecting for early printed material. So it's fabulous that you have one here. Many of these have sold over the years, and the color versions that are in spectacular condition and fully complete have sold for six figures, even though they printed roughly 1,500 or so of them. This version, which does have some color, but it is not as substantially colored, as others that have surfaced, is a pretty remarkable example. And if it were to ever surface at auction or be sold in a gallery somewhere, I think you would expect it to sell for somewhere in the $30,000 to $40,000 range. It's a very valuable publication. So I'm thrilled that you brought it in, and it's great that Xavier has this in their collection.
Yes, we're very lucky.
Thank you for bringing it. Yeah.
Sure, thank you.
All right, Jim, you have something else here. You have a group of what look like academic medals. So why don't you tell me what you know about them?
Well, these medals are basically from 1887 through 1909. They were awarded at the commencement exercises during that time period by St. Xavier College. And if you look in the Xavier course catalogs for that time, you will actually see the particular person whose name is on each of the medals, that they were awarded for a particular thing. It might have been a catechetical award. It might be award for first honors.
Sure.
But most of the medals are from Albert Petker, and he was a Jesuit here at Xavier. He taught physics. Later, he became the president of Detroit University.
And so he was awarding these?
He was the one who received it. He was the one who received it as a student.
Okay, I see.
But they were given to the university in 1980, I believe, by the sister of Albert Petker.
So it was a family gift.
Yes.
Well, it's a great thing to get back. I'm sure these have great value to Xavier, just because it's a part of their history. And whoever was crafting the medals was pretty skilled, actually, because they're pretty elaborate. They don't do them like this anymore. It looks like they're all hand engraved with the particular award, and then their name is engraved on the reverse side. I don't know that they're gold. Typically, if they were gold, they would have had markings. And so we would have to test them, but I'm not sure that they are. They're just beautifully done. And it looks like he was a pretty accomplished student. But I'm glad that you got them back to have in your archives. In assessing value for these, really, the sentimental value of having them back here at Xavier is more important than anything else. There isn't really much of a market for something like this because it's so narrow, and it would be hard to place a value on them other than if they were simply gold and you were assessing the value of that gold. So the fact that you have them here, I think, is wonderful. And it's a nice example of the medals that they would produce because they really have fabulous detail. And I'm not sure who was crafting them, probably somebody here in Cincinnati, but they're beautifully done, beautifully engraved. So thanks for bringing them by. Value is hard to say for these. I would say in the hundreds of dollars, but more important that Xavier University actually has them. So they're great. Thanks for bringing them by.
Well, thank you.
Okay, Marty, we have another interesting thing here. Why don't you tell me about it? It's an antiphonary, correct?
Antiphonary, yes.
Okay.
I don't have very much information about this particular book, but I've done some research on similar books, and this is either from the 13th or 14th century. There was a rare book librarian that came to a meeting at Xavier, and she said that this illumination is typical of Spanish illumination.
Okay, sure.
It's on vellum. Looks like it's been used.
Yeah,
so that's
and restored and cared for. It
right,
definitely has been.
Incredible binding covers. And
Sure.
That's pretty much all I know. I'm not sure.
Well,
who gave it to us.
we usually see these, as you had mentioned earlier, we see them usually with just a single page. They might be framed. Vellum by its nature holds up really well over time, and so it's not uncommon to see these, but it is very uncommon to see a full book such as this. And somebody over time has really cared for it. There's stitching throughout. There are patches or replacement pieces, and probably it was restored in certain areas and repainted or recolorized, and that happens. But to have a fully complete book like this with all these beautiful pages, all this handwork, is rare. And even the binding, what's really great about this is that the binding appears to be original to the work itself. And we may turn it over shortly, but it's a pretty heavy thing. The binding has what looks like bronze corners, an old leather covering with nails, and these heavy panels that are supporting it. And it's held up really well. It's still bound with this string completely. So in the past, I have seen these pages that are nicely illuminated that might be framed and in better condition in a more contemporary frame cell. And even those are of interest to collectors because they're collected as a beautiful object. So individual pages you may see from this period of time sell for $800 to $1,000. And these are those that are in really good condition with all original color. And the fact that you have one here with numerous pages and entirely complete is certainly rare. Now, it's not something that can be easily displayed. It has to be well cared for and closed most of the time. And because of its condition, individual pages value wouldn't be quite that much that I've seen previously. But to have a complete set such as this, I think, would be of great interest to collectors if it ever sold. So if something like this sold, I would estimate its value in the $20,000 to $30,000 range, somewhere in there. It's really remarkably preserved and a great example of these illuminated pages on vellum. So another fabulous thing that you brought in.
All right, thank
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Helmut. You came in and they've brought down a desk that you used for a number of years, I understand.
Yes.
Tell me about it. How long did you have it?
Oh, for a good number of years. But that actually the history, it goes back to the Edgecliff days.
Okay.
Because this desk actually was donated by an alumna.
And I understand it was an Emory, correct?
No, it was in Max Welton.
Okay.
In Max Welton, the music department. And she specifically donated it to the music department.
Okay.
And so it wound up in my office, up on the second floor.
I see.
And, well, as the history goes, this desk didn't fit into their homes. They saw the desk, they bought it, and then when it arrived at home, it was too big.
Okay.
and she was a graduate, an early graduate of Our Lady of Cincinnati College.
Okay.
And so that's the way it wound up there. So
I can certainly understand that it might have been too big for someone's home.
Yeah.
This is the kind of piece of furniture that has fallen out of favor a little bit because it's so high style, and it doesn't necessarily fit in certain homes anymore. But we would call this Louis XVI style being the key word, of course, because this is not an early 18th century or 17th century desk. It's almost like a large console table. The one side has, as you were telling me earlier, deep drawers, and it's all ormolu mounted, which is a brass gilt mounting, and it's beautifully outfitted. It has its sort of leather center panel here, but this was probably made in the early 20th century. The more you start to get to looking at these drawers and the underside and the manner in which everything is put together, it would be regarded as a copy of a much earlier style desk. So once you get into the front drawers, you notice that they aren't dovetailed or have old construction. They have simple glued construction. And on the bottom, as I was poking around before the appraisal, because you probably don't want to see my rear end right now, getting under the desk, you see much newer construction, and it's held up really well. And it also, I saw an inscription, "Made in Romania," on the bottom of the desk. And of course, this is a French-style desk. So the reason that so much of this furniture was produced during the turn of the century, or the early 20th century, is because people were interested in decorating their homes with this kind of material. We see anything from marbles and paintings and furniture that we call grand tour pieces. You know, something that somebody may have picked up in Europe as a token of their visit there, or if they were residing there. And much of that is reproduced or reproduction material. So this is one such desk, although it's very well put together, and in today's market, to put a value on it, would be nowhere near a period Louis XVI desk, but it would still have some value. I mean, I would estimate this for maybe auction purposes at $1,000 to $1,500, but nowhere near the level that it would be if it were a period desk. But it's beautiful. It's a beautiful reproduction. Well, thank you for bringing it in.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.